Villains are weird. Some games follow tried and tested patterns for their antagonists, while others break these patterns and offer the player unforgettable experiences. And these bizarre but unique cases make for such interesting analysis. An example would be Wonder from Shadow of the Colossus, who is one of the 5 characters I will examine in this video. So for this final episode of this series, let's analyze why these 5 singular evildoers are memorable, and finish with a game which should make you question traditional video game villains. In 2005, Monolith Productions released the survivor horror F.E.A.R. You play as Pointman, a member of a team which investigates paranormal entities and activities. The beginning of the game puts Paxton Fatal in the role of the antagonist, the commander of telepathically controlled super soldiers. And this guy seems to have gone rogue. The game quickly reveals that Fatal and his soldiers are nothing compared to a larger problem named Alma. Who is Alma? She's a little girl wearing a red dress with long black hair that covers her pale face. She doesn't walk, but floats. Oh, and makes people turn to ash. She's a pervasive threat that rarely shows herself in the game, and when she does, she makes sure to swiftly vanish herself. Alma is conceptualized as a rather unique and paradoxical villain, to say the least. In a psychological horror game, you would expect to face a horrifyingly large antagonist. However, as the director and scriptwriter of the game, Craig Hubbard, mentions, a guy in a mask with a meat cleaver can be scary. But when a spooky little girl takes out an entire Delta Force squad, how are you supposed to deal with that? Alma seems like a vaguely familiar figure, doesn't she? Well, Hubbard remarked in an interview that he was inspired by Sadako, the unseen antagonist from the novel Ring by Koji Suzuki. Sadako was a young woman gifted with technopathic powers, with the terrible ending of being killed and thrown into a well after being abused by a smallpox-infected doctor. The novel was adapted in 1998 into a Japanese film, Ringu, with its 2002 American remake, The Ring. You know, the one with the creepy girl coming out of the TV. Hubbard also mentions that, for the name, he was inspired by Alma Mobley, a dramatist persona from Ghost Story by Peter Straub, another scary novel. Alma's frightful backstory is told throughout the entire game, and although most people consider her an evildoer, it's only at the end you understand Alma is, in fact, a tragic character, a tragic villain. Endowed from birth with exceptional psychic abilities, she suffered enormously from nightmares amplified by the negative emotions of those around her. These abilities were the reason her father, Harlan Wade, forced her into a secret program with military purpose called Project Origin, and her own father subjected her to cruel trials and tests, culminating with inseminations aimed at obtaining prototypes that copy her strength. Eventually, due to Alma's menacing growing powers, Wade brought her to a state of coma and locked her into the Vault, a subterranean structure. In her father's eyes, the girl was nothing but the principal specimen for his experiments, a dangerous secret that had to be buried. All those atrocities, including the drama of imposed separation from the prototypes, which Alma perceived as her children, and her father's decision to shut down the vital support, virtually letting her die, transformed Alma into a vindictive spirit with godlike powers who tries to escape by any means.
Give me back my baby!
You will be a god among men. Take her back to the vault.
Now, she's a ghost full of psychic energy, blinded by hate and rage, hunting down those who hurt her, determined to destroy them. And hey, why not the whole world as well? And maybe the end of the game makes you think, was Alma the real villain? Wasn't Harlan Wade a bigger villain you didn't actually face? So Alma may be an antagonist, but a debatable one. Nevertheless, she is undoubtedly a memorable character. Her physical existence is uncertain, and sometimes you get the impression that there's no real threat. But unclear whispers, childish chuckles, and the feeling that someone's looking over your shoulder make the player understand. Do not get fooled. Alma is watching you. You don't always need a murderous villain. It may be something that springs deep from within the protagonist. Maybe it's their history that haunts them, which they would like everyone to forget about, although it's part of their identity. Or perhaps something in their psychology prevents them from reaching, say, the peak of a mountain. If that sounds familiar, it might be, as I'm talking about the critically acclaimed 2018 platformer Celeste. In this one, you play as a young woman called Madeline who set out to climb the Celeste mountain. The path to the peak is by no means harmless, but the biggest threat isn't quite what you would expect from a platformer. After meeting Theo, a fellow climber, and finishing the first chapter of the game, Madeline kindles a fire and goes to sleep. Inside her dream, or rather nightmare, she enters a room with a huge mystical mirror, out of which her reflection, a purple figure, breaks out. This person turns out to be a part of Madeline, or commonly known as Madeline. She's a physical representation of Madeline's fears, anxiety, and self-doubt, that tries to convince her that it's best for both of them to quit climbing and turn back. Madeline rejects and runs away from her, practically running away from her problems. That's uncomfortably relatable. For the next few chapters, Madeline keeps appearing in the real world, causing trouble to Madeline, who, wanting to get rid of her worries, asks why she's not going away. Later in the game, Madeline willingly talks with Madeline, telling the latter that she is free to go, Madeline no longer wanting to be anxious. Yet, the problems aren't fixed until Madeline figures out the right solution. She needs to accept her feelings, even if they are not pleasant, even if she will get hurt. It's not about running away from fear or living fearlessly, but about learning to live with that fear. And it's not surprising the game works best when they decide to help each other and work together to reach the summit. An interesting situation is when the player has to work together with a villain. Maybe their objectives align and it's in everyone's interest to collaborate. Even stranger, you might be compelled to work for the villain. When I think of this scenario, there's one game that instantly comes to my mind. The 2006 Game of the Year winner, Shadow of the Colossus, which plays around the theme of light and darkness. The game puts you in the role of Wander, about whom not much is revealed besides his mission, to revive Mono, supposed to be his beloved maiden. At the Shrine of Worship, a place at the end of the world, Wander finds a being who can control the soul of the dead, named Dormin, which is a strange incorporeal being speaking in two voices, male and female. But bringing back Mono's spirit is not an everyday chore, and any eventual help wouldn't be free. Dormin notes that Wander has the ancient sword, and in exchange, they task Wander to destroy 16 colossi, gigantic creatures who lived throughout the Forbidden Lands. But there is a warning. Completing this endeavor may force Wander to pay a heavy price. To Wander, that doesn't seem to be of such importance. This drastically changes how both Dormin and Wander are perceived. You understand that Dormin is rather an evil spirit, with a vague impetus, yet you can't reckon them as an antagonist, so much less as an ultimate villain. Why not? They don't hinder the hero from progressing. They even drop a hint about the colossi here and there. That must count for something. As for the hero, and here it becomes interesting, in his attempt to accomplish the mission, Wander also does the work of the antagonist. Because long ago, Dormin was the ruler of the Forbidden Lands, but Lord Imon, a shaman, considered the entity malefic, imprisoned them in the Shrine of Worship, and, to suppress Dormin's powers, he managed to capture their essence and fragmented it in 16 parts, sealing each one into a Colossus. Thus, destroying the Colossi and gathering back this essence meant Dormin could reincarnate and regain power over the Forbidden Lands. Following the death of a Colossus, a fragment of essence would be released and enter Wander's body, making him a vessel for Dormin's completed spirit. Somehow, Dormin forgot to tell Wander this story. Between you and me, neither did Wander ask many questions. Even when riding a big, strong horse and wielding a magical sword, killing 16 colossi must be something quite grueling. Let's not forget about Lord Imon and his group of soldiers, who were opposing Dormin's reincarnation with all their power. I guess they had some reasons. And that raises a new question. If Wander is the hero, fighting for Mono's resurrection by doing a job for Dormin, and Lord Emon is trying to stop Wander, arguably doing what's right, where does this leave us? Who's the good guy, but the bad one? Each time he destroys a Colossus, Wander's skin becomes paler, his hair darker, and his face is increasingly streaked by dark veins. After finishing off the final Colossus, Wander turns completely pale, and even a pair of horns appears on his head. The game is practically nodding to the hefty toll Wander accepted to pay, slowly rotting from the inside, but stopping at nothing to revive Mono. After returning to Dormin's temple, he is cut down by Lord Emon's followers. Black blood starts pouring out of him, and Wander turns into a shadowy figure. Now completely corrupted, Dormin possesses his body and attacks the group, forcing them to flee. Lord Emon throws Wander's ancient sword into a pool, triggering a windstorm of light that consumes Dormin and, shortly after, Wander's body. The game then lets you try to escape the swirl, which proves to be impossible, symbolizing that Wander himself became corrupt and evil, something that must be rid of. In the end, Mono wakes up after being revived by Dormin. She finds at the bottom of the pool a newborn with horns, perhaps a reborn Wander or a reincarnation of Dormin. And this makes you wonder, pun intended, if killing the Colossi for your egotistical reasons was truly the right decision. What if the game allows you to choose if the hero will be the savior of the day, or they will be turned into a soulless murderer? This brings us back to Dishonored, where Corvo Attano, the protagonist, can save the Empire or sink it forever. The design of the game hides a small jewel. The creators thought of an apparently simple concept which some initially did not even notice, the so-called Chaos level. At the beginning of one mission, the player gets a little warning. Your actions affect the city. A high number of deaths results in darker final outcomes. This creates a conundrum on the morality of the player and leaves the way the game ends up to them. You may cause mayhem and kill a bunch of people, leading to a high level of chaos. Or instead, you may be just a ghost leaping on rooftops and have no one on your conscience, finishing on a low level of chaos. Maybe none at all. If you choose the second option, the game ends in the best possible way. Harvey Smith, creative director, thought that Arkane had made the first assassination game where you don't need to kill anyone. And Rafael Colantonio, co-creative director, considered this choice almost like an Easter egg. In fact, the player will find that the game is meant to be played as peacefully as possible, as ravaging the city is cleverly discouraged by the game itself. And this isn't only for an interesting Easter egg, but also because the story in Dishonored 2 makes sense only if Dishonored and its DLCs are played on a low level of chaos. If you choose the bloody version, you can take it to the extreme by killing or torturing all your targets. You will complete all missions, finish the game, and you will get a much darker outcome. You will lose your allies. People will help you out of fear. Those who respected you end up loathing you, and the city will be hurt. More dead people mean more rats, rat plague, and weepers, and everything is heading fast towards a catastrophic ending. Practically, you're almost the only one left on their feet after putting the whole city down. Did I say darker outcome? What about the darkest? Let me explain. In the last mission, you have to neutralize Admiral Havelock and rescue Emily Caldwin, Empress Jessamine's daughter. If you choose the murderous route, upon saving Emily, her reaction is this.
The others are all dead, aren't they? That's alright, because I was going to have them killed anyway. I am going to be Empress.
And so, our hero, hacking and slashing, managed to get the darkest final outcome in the goriest possible way, corrupting even the purest soul in the whole story. One final mention about Dishonored. There is also an ending in which you do not save Emily. She dies with Havelock falling into the abyss and Corvo lets the Empire collapse. No, it's not a better ending. Au contraire.
But now, you'll be off over the horizon on an outbound ship. I wonder, are you chasing something or running away?
And then we can ask ourselves, couldn't it be that by playing the game the evil way, we turn the hero into a villain? In fact, the greatest villain of the game, or a better one. Could Corvo Attano be a villain to remember.
Corvo, you're back!
Sometimes the antagonist is uncertain, or you don't find it where you would expect, and that can complicate the story. Does that make the villain less dangerous? Or makes the hero less useful? An example of this can be the story in The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, a horror adventure game launched in 2014 by the Astronauts. The protagonist, Paul Prospero, is a private detective investigating paranormal cases.
When the police won't help you and the priests don't believe you, you call on Paul Prospero. You call on me.
Now, he has to solve a few puzzle-like stories uncovering dark secrets, witchcraft rituals, and malefic entities in order to find a missing child, Ethan Carter. After finding the location where the kid is held, the player has a huge surprise. Paul Prospero, the dark secrets, witchcraft rituals, malefic entities, none of those exist. Never did. Everything was just a hallucination, a burst of the imagination of a 12-year-old boy. Ethan, like any other child, had a creative mind which he had used to write fantastic stories. And that was exactly why those in the family dismissed the boy. A dominating mother who considered Ethan an oddball with his head in the clouds.
Stop living in your head. Do something real.
A well-intentioned but weak father, overshadowed by the attitude of his wife.
And, please don't tell your mother I'm in here. All right? Okay.
An older brother who constantly taunted him.
Stories, stories, always with the stories.
An uncle despising his nephew.
You need to stop leaving your stupid stories around. They're freaking everyone out.
The only one who tried to help the boy was his grandfather.
Travis, leave the boy alone. I see how you've been looking at him.
Ethan had found a hiding place where his imagination came to life in those fictitious narratives. Looking for him because he had been absent from dinner again, the family found his little secret. A fire was accidentally triggered and Ethan remained stuck in a room, dying asphyxiated. Practically, the whole story of the game actually happens in the last 4 minutes of Ethan's life, as a final cry of pain, rage, and despair of imagination.
I can let go?
You can let go.
What happens then?
Another story, kid. What else?
Paul Prospero is the last point of contact of the child's smoke-drowning mind with the reality he had built precisely to escape the real world. And then, what? Who is the villain? May it be identified in one person? In more? Is it the family, who mostly didn't understand Ethan and saw him as the odd one out because of his imagination? Is it the inability of the child to adapt to a reality which he could not improve, much less control it? Could it be just faith, kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time? And then again, who is the hero? That kid living a life he was trying to hide under a dark fantasy which he could endure. Prospero for bringing that last glimmer of hope before the final darkness? The game leaves you with a feeling that you fought against an opponent you couldn't beat, no matter what you would have done, and yet you got half a victory, but such a bitter one.
I wrote stories about everyone.
It's been a long road, starting from the foundational blocks of writing antagonists and finishing with villains chock full of ideas and techniques we can borrow from. Throughout this series, I tried to pack as many general tips and actionable advice as I could. And I believe I can confidently say that, after watching it, you should know a thing or two about writing fantastic video game villains. And it wasn't easy to create it. But in spite of all the hardships, ranging from its structure to the actual writing, there's one person who has helped me a tremendous amount on this collaborative project. By now, a master of putting up with my stubbornness and inexperience. My father. Thus, if this series succeeded in developing either your character creation skills or your critical eye for villains, it's thanks to him. It's time to round off everything nicely. If you've stuck with me for the entirety of this journey, I hope you found it worthwhile. And if that's the case, you should subscribe so you don't miss future analyses. Who knows, maybe one about anti-heroes and how playing as one creates an interesting dilemma. Or come hang out on Patreon. along with all these exceptional people who have supported me in producing each and every episode, like Avirama FM, Badr Al-Kahtani, Bello23, Debashish Patra, Giovanni Penna, Golden Glowmaster, Rahul Mahibal, Realitats Verlast, and Waifu is Laifu. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.